Hi, and welcome to How We Work Now, where we explore how people are reshaping the modern workplace through lived experience with neurodiversity, chronic illness, and disability. Today I'm joined by Jem Kennedy. They are a freelance neurodivergent coach and speaker who supports individuals and teams in building ways of working that actually fit how people think, feel, and function. Jem brings their lived experience as an ADHD professional into their work, blending self-advocacy, practical systems design, and culture change to help people move away from burnout and towards sustainable human-centered work. I'm really glad to have you here today, Jem.
Thanks so much for
Welcome,
having me.
and please introduce yourself.
Yeah, I'm always terrible at this, and I always say that I'm terrible at it, so please forgive me if it's bad. Um, my name is Jem Kennedy, my pronouns are they, them, and yeah, my work is as you described. So I'm a coach, I'm a speaker, I also have a background in facilitation and consultancy around supporting individuals and groups, companies to essentially build more neuroaffirming practices, workplaces, and I guess my work is different in that I'm not supporting people to kind of adapt themselves to fit in with what is considered normal or what the social norms are. I'm much more about deconstructing what the social norms are and making them fit with how people's brains and bodies best function. So yeah, it's kind of I guess maybe a slightly backwards approach in that often we're told to adapt ourselves to fit into the workplace. But for me, it's much more about how does the workplace actually fit with what it means to be a neurodivergent person, a queer person, a disabled person, any other marginalised identities.
Right, it's kind of changing it from squeezing myself into the mold to how can I recreate a mold that actually fits the shape I already am.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and realising there's not actually anything inherently wrong with how we are, like it's okay. And actually that the systems that exist have intentionally been created to gatekeep or to, make them inaccessible for some people. And so it's much more about how do we dismantle that than, squeeze ourselves into what exists already.
Exactly. I love that. That's my whole approach too. So we're going to get along great.
Amazing.
So, what, experiences have you gone through that helped you realize that, traditional work and the systems that be were not built for your brain or people like us?
Yeah, it's really interesting because you sent the questions in advance, which I really appreciated, by the way, super neurodivergent friendly, to have a chance to kind of process them. And I think I was reflecting on it because I think if you looked at me from the outside, you wouldn't have necessarily considered me to be someone who was struggling. I was very good at performing, being good at my work. I was very diligent, conscientious. And I think that came from really a very young age, realizing that that was what I was going to have to be if I was going to make it through in school. So, really kind of prioritizing working very hard, being very focused on those kinds of things. And by the time I got to my sort of teenage years, late teens, I would say I was totally burnt out and actually couldn't sustain that anymore. But going into the workplace felt that I had to take that same energy, the kind of, don't worry, I've got it all covered. I'm a model employee. And I think that's how I probably was perceived, but internally the experience was very different. Your question made me realize that I don't think I'd quite looked at my focus across my different roles and realized how much I'd struggled with focus, especially on tasks that didn't interest me. I remember just sort of, doing very boring tasks and finding it soul destroyingly terrible. And I think I thought that everyone else experienced that. There were just some things that were painfully boring and you had to do them. But I think what I realize now is that it's just different. I think that, we could go into things like monotropism and how our nervous systems function. There's so many ways in which my way of being is not aligned with the traditional workplace. Yeah, I don't know if that answers your question.
Could you define monotropism for our viewers?
Yeah, so it's a really helpful theory that has been developed by autistic adults. And it's essentially this idea that our nervous systems are interest-based. And so we're very good at kind of getting super deep into things we're passionate about, learning everything and becoming almost like expert level very quickly. And we're driven by that interest. It kind of feeds our well-being and helps us feel really good in the world. And that can be an amazing gift. It can mean that we can get super into things, but it can also be incredibly hard in ways where, for example, we may find it hard to focus our attention if we're not passionate about something, or if we're engaged in something we're passionate about, and then it's time to switch to a different task. It can feel physically painful and very distressing to have to move away to something else. And conversely, polytropic people are people who would have generally, they're able to kind of move around, not to say they can't gain expertise or anything, but generally are more able to move around more easily. It's maybe more flowy between transitions. And yeah, I think realizing that about myself and how important it is to be interested in my work, because otherwise anything less than that, and it's actually just painful and, road to burnout if I'm not getting that kind of constant burst of things I'm passionate about. And that's the same for many, many autistic, ADHD and ADHD people. I don't want to say that everyone is monotropic who is neurodivergent, but there is a really a good questionnaire that you can do. I'll share the link with you in case it's useful for your viewers. It kind of helps you answer lots of questions, and then it gives you a monotropic rating based to the general or compared to the general population, and then compared to other neurodivergents. So it's fascinating, I think, to understand more about how we work.
Love that. So what kind of early coping strategies did you rely on before you had the language and expertise to really know exactly what you could do to support your neurodivergence?
Yeah, I think kind of what I alluded to before, really just very high masking, being like, I'm so good at my job. I've got this covered. I remember one specific job right, at the beginning of my career was making phone calls. It was all telephone based, and it meant that I was having, probably I would, in theory, have needed to make like 150 calls a day. And I just didn't really do it. So I tried back in the day, obviously there wasn't that much internet research. So I would try to find out the information that I needed through internet research. And only as a last resort would I make a phone call. And I thought, I didn't realize why that was at the time, but it was because I hate phone calls and I find them really stressful. And being overheard in the office was really worrying for me because I was, so scared of making a mistake. I think taking toilet breaks, like leaving the workplace as much as I could, because sensory wise it was overwhelming. Really kind of just trying to, I used my holiday spread out across the year to try to have like, I've only got another month to get through and then I'm going to have a break. Just at the time I had no idea why I needed to do those things, but there were sort of lots of small ways in which I tried to make it more manageable, I guess.
Just finding any kind of gap or space you could to just take a breath and catch your breath from everything you had to go through.
Yeah, and I think living in a constant state of anxiety at that time really just meant that I was sort of like a pinball just bouncing from one thing to the next, colleagues are going out for lunch. I'm really anxious about that. What am I going to say? How's that going to go? And then, in the afternoon, I've got to prepare for a meeting. How's that? Like, it was just a constant, what's the right word? Just a constant stream, I guess, of anxiety-inducing things.
Yeah. So if you could give some advice to your past self who's going through these things, what's something you wish that you'd been told about work and your capacity back then?
Yeah, I think I'd really, really like to have known about monotropism and understand why I couldn't make my brain do the things that everyone else was seemingly able to do. I think that would have been really helpful. Like, it's not that there's anything wrong with you, you're not lazy. It's just that your brain cannot get into something if it's not interested in it, or it doesn't understand why that thing is meaningful. And I think about energy levels as well, that particularly with the ADHD people that I support, there's this, I don't know if you've noticed this in your work as well, there's definitely this kind of stereotypical energy cycle that is very spiky. And I think I kind of bounced between that, feeling like, wow, I'm so high energy, I can sustain this forever. And then being like, oh no, here it goes into burnout, feeling like I was going to be burnt out forever, trying to kind of get back up to some sense of, being able to cope again. And then the whole roller coaster started again. So, I think understanding that is what was happening for me would have been really helpful. Like, why can't you speak some days? Or why is it so difficult for you to think about what you're going to get for your lunch? All of those basic things that are not even actually about the job. They're really just about how we function before we even do anything. I'd really love to have known about those things.
Yeah, I think learning to accept the rest cycle that needs to happen between the productive
Mhm.
bursts has been one of the most difficult parts for me in learning to deal with my stuff, because I remember how good I felt when I was super productive and I got everything done. I'm like, just do that again. Just do it again.
Yeah,
You don't, but you can't. You have to be like, nope, I'm not doing anything right now. I'm going to rest as much as
yeah,
possible so that way I can have another productive burst and get all
exactly.
these things done.
Yeah.
So let's zoom forward to the present. What
Mhm.
does a workday designed for your ADHD look like today in practice?
Yeah, I think first of all to say no one workday looks the same, and I think that is both helpful and unhelpful at times for me. So it's helpful in that I really thrive on having some variety. So if I had the same work day every day, I would struggle with that.
Mm.
But also, there's a part of me that really likes routine. And so there's this constant tension, as is very common in the ADHD experience, to want to set up my workday in a certain way, to want to have routines to get my day started. But I've actually really kind of surrendered to the fact that that is just not how I function.
Mm.
So usually it would look like I do have fixed times that I see clients within, kind of slots through the
Mm.
day. And I also have learned about myself that I need gaps between, a bit like we were saying with the
Mm.
transitions, and also that I need to prioritize. I have young children, I should have mentioned that. So I'm, not my work pattern also isn't the traditional Monday to Friday. The other thing I was just going to say there was around needing to schedule in movement. And so for me, going to the gym sometimes during my workday is really helpful. I lift really heavy weights intentionally because it's really good for my sensory system. And
Mm.
knowing that I can access that if I need to is really helpful. Obviously, if I have clients booked in, then that's not available, but I may then go sort of later in the afternoon or the first thing before work. Yes, so I think variety, and I think lots of body doubling. So when I'm doing obviously one-to-one sessions, then I'm, very able to focus because I'm passionate about what I do. But then when it comes to things like invoicing or social media writing or, those kinds of things, I really need body doubling to help me do those things. Otherwise, it just becomes like, oh, I'll go off on 100 million ADHD tangents and not actually do the
Yeah.
thing that I was supposed to do. Yeah.
Do you have like tools that you use for body doubling, like online co-working spaces or
I've tried various ones. There's a really great one called Not Your Business, which is specifically for neurodivergent and queer people, like entrepreneurs or freelancers, and I find that really helpful. I've tried more traditional co-working online spaces, and the things that I've found difficult about them sometimes are that they're not always that neurodivergent friendly. So they require you to introduce yourself to a whole bunch of people that you don't know, or to make small talk in the beginning where you say what you're going to do. Those kinds of things I've actually found have caused me a bit more anxiety than just, yeah, not going along. So yeah, I think I have found helpful online tools. Mainly I co-work with my partner because they like we can kind of match up our schedules sometimes, so we both benefit from having that kind of co-working body doubling time. So yeah, in short, I guess not really anything that's ideal. Yeah.
okay. So let's see. What systems do you use to help you manage specifically attention, energy, and task initiation? Because I know that can be really hard for a lot of neurodivergent folks.
Yeah. I think the tricky thing that I have found is that there isn't one thing that works all the time. So I feel like for me,
Mhm.
it's a constant evolving picture of, okay, this thing worked this week, but knowing and accepting that it may not work next week and being able to
Mhm.
try other things. One of the main things that I found helpful is almost giving something a try and knowing that if it doesn't work, I can move on to something else. I don't have to persist being like, oh, this has worked for me for the last 2 months, and so I must now do it forever this way. So again, yeah, trying to be flexible around that. And I think because a lot of my work isn't about supporting people to find hacks for their brains, I'm really not a fan of that kind of
Mhm.
narrative that's out there around 5 hacks for your ADHD brain. I'm much
Uh,
more about kind of going with energy cycles. Like, what do I feel
mhm.
able to do? What do I feel inspired to do today? What's going to feel really good for me when I have 2 hours free? If I have a deadline, that really helps to focus my mind and to make sure that I get something done on time. Yeah, so I don't know that I've got, I would say for me, it's more kind of an energetic sense and like way of being than actually, oh, I just use this particular system, if that makes sense.
So learning to tune into your natural energy rhythms and go with the
Yeah.
flow.
Hmm.
Okay, so in your coaching work, are there really frequent patterns that you see a lot in neurodivergent professionals?
Yeah, I think I'm always really bad at generalizing, but I guess I would say one of the things is the ADHD energy cycle is a real thing and definitely something that I spend a lot of time supporting people around. I think especially when people are leaders and they've kind of made it to a certain point in their career, there's obviously the classic burnout where people either hit like they've had many burnouts across their lifetimes, but maybe have understood them as depression or anxiety or going through a tough time. But then they have sometimes this kind of ultimate burnout that really either catalyzes them realizing they're neurodivergent or realizing that things have to change. I think that's a very common pattern. And then it's kind of like everything back to basics. Okay, so what is actually sustainable? How do you want to live and work? And then there was another example I thought of, which was around spiky profiles and that challenge of I kind of, as I was saying earlier, that we don't necessarily have the same abilities or function or capacity all the time. And that's so hard to try and help people to understand that what you can do this week, you may not be able to do next week. And that is okay, but quite stressful and scary. So how do you work with that when it's, yeah, spiky profiles are constantly moving. Being neurodivergent is a dynamic experience. So yeah, I guess they're the main things I would say.
I think especially when you're running your own business or getting something off the ground and you're responsible for a lot of things in the beginning, learning to work with knowing how your capacity can change week to week can be really scary and difficult because you're like, well,
Yeah.
these things need to get done. So how can I ensure everything gets done, even if some days I'm not able to do them the way I might have wanted to schedule myself out to do them in advance?
Definitely. And I think when there's that sense of urgency in the beginning with setting something up, it can be much easier to have a laser focus on what needs to happen so that X, Y, and Z can happen. But I think over time, especially for people who maybe have like ADHD or who are ADHD, that there can be a wane in interest when it becomes more about the monotonous day-to-day tasks. And so it's how to stay connected to a sense of motivation or interest when actually it becomes a bit boring. And it may be that we still believe in what we're doing, but just actually that the how it looks day to day has become less about getting everything up and running and being in that innovator kind of startup energy and more into just plodding along, maintaining things.
The unfortunate necessity of sometimes, things are monotonous as hard
Yeah,
as we try to
exactly.
avoid it.
Yeah.
So is there any common advice about work that you like to really push back against?
Um, yeah. Just let me pause for a second because I did think of something and then I think it's gone. Hold
Of
on.
course.
Classic. um, I think there's a few things. So one of the things that I think is really damaging to neurodivergent people and people in general is often their experience of schooling. And there's so much that we take into the workplace or that we think we learn about the workplace from being schooled. Things like what is or isn't possible, what is considered like the best use of our time or the best way to spend our lives, how we should work. And I think often people end up in jobs that they were not really best suited to because they feel like they've been pushed into them or they feel like that's what society expects of them.
Mhm.
So I think there's something for me around people really actually being able to think about how do they genuinely want to spend their time? Like, does it feel good to them to work on a spreadsheet from 9 till 5? For some people, they love that and that would be ideal. For other people, they need to be doing something completely different, like moving their bodies a
Mhm.
lot or having a lot of interaction. So yeah, I think there's that idea of it's not just as simple as choosing something you think will make you money or that society respects and doing that, because actually for our monotropic brains, it becomes incredibly difficult over time. Um, yeah. And did you want any more examples or I think you just wanted one?
Oh, that's fine.
um,
Yeah.
yeah, go on.
I
Sorry.
think the push between I need to make money to survive and I need to find a way to do something that doesn't drain the life and soul out of me every single day is something a
Yeah.
lot of neurodivergent people struggle with, finding that balance of how can I do both things at once. So make enough money to survive and
Yeah.
have something that gives me enough purpose to keep going on as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's a risk as well. Like it's not always as simple as, oh, just find something you're interested in, because for lots of us, especially ADHDers or ADHDers, we may have passions, but they may wane. So we may find that we've
Wow.
ended up in a job that we were passionate about 10 years ago, but actually really doesn't fit with our interests now. And
Yeah.
obviously, society says that you kind of generally find a career path and you pretty much should stick at it in order to be successful rather than move around or to change jobs regularly. Yeah,
Yeah, kind of the struggle of having to go back to an entry level role if you want to switch to a different career, but at the same
yeah,
time, you're burnt out and exhausted with the one you have.
exactly.
So, do you have any advice about things managers specifically who are managing other people misunderstand about neurodivergent performance and maybe some of the people they're managing?
Yeah, I think there's lots of things. So, I mean, the classic, you've met one neurodivergent person, you've met one neurodivergent
Mm,
person, we're all
mhm.
different. So, um, I find it quite frustrating that there is, now the buzzword of neuroaffirming or neurodiversity just means that people do like an hour and a half training and they suddenly know how to manage a team
Mhm.
that is neurodivergent. That for me is not is not how it works. So it's really, I think about listening to your staff, understanding what they are saying their needs are, or helping them have a framework or a space to figure that out. Because lots of people realize they're neurodivergent, and then their employers may be really happy to help them figure out, they may be happy to help them access accommodations, but they're actually like, you tell us what you need and we will make it happen. But that's not always very helpful if the person doesn't know what the options are or doesn't have any kind of scaffolding to figure out that for themselves. It's a lot of work for the neurodivergent person. Um, I think also that you can't understand someone's experience from observing their work. It needs to be much more about how do you have direct conversations with people to understand what's their internal process, what's going on for them in their work, rather than just how you think they're performing from the outside. Because it may be that you have employees who are going home at the weekend and they're in bed from Friday till Monday morning, can't speak to anyone, and then they get up in,
Mhm.
Monday morning and they are super functioning as though everything is
I've been there.
fine. Exactly. So it's like everything may not be how it appears on the surface. Excuse me. And I think the spiky profile thing really plays into that, because this idea that as neurodivergent people, and specifically this theory comes up for autistics, but like we can think about it for, various disabilities anyway, or disabilities potentially. But this idea that we may seem to be very strong in a particular area or multiple areas, but in other areas, our skills may be not as developed or like not as accessible as the things, as some things. So, for example, we may be very good at having articulate conversations, but it might also be that we can't prepare a meal, and you would
Mhm.
never, like, if you were plotting what you thought someone's ability was from the outside, those assumptions would just be like, oh, it looks like they can do X, Y, and Z. And actually, that's really unhelpful, because then in a team, you've got holes or, really kind of potentially things that you think are being covered, but actually people are scrambling to try and like fill up the holes and make it look like their experience or their skills match
Mhm.
across the board when they don't necessarily. And that's totally fine. Like, no one could be good at everything all the time, but really remembering that just because from the outside it looks like people are high performing, there could be skills or areas that they're really struggling with and need support. Yeah, I could say lots more, but I'll pause there.
So, would you say that it can be really important for managers to work on making their team feel safe expressing the areas in which they aren't very strong in and knowing that they're not going to get in trouble if they're like, I actually can't do this very well. So that
Yeah,
way, those holes can be spotted a lot easier and filled without blame or judgment to any specific person.
absolutely. Yeah, I think, yeah, everything you've said there. And just being able to have that is much more important than any kind of software or, you know, anything else that you can theoretically provide. It's really just about helping people to understand
Mhm.
what they do and don't struggle with and where they might or might not need support, and then being able to be like, oh, well, so and so loves writing campaign emails, or so and so loves doing this thing. You hate that, but you really love this thing. So like just jiggling it around rather than being, this is your job spec, this is what we expect from you. Yeah, so a much more holistic sort of team approach.
Yeah. Piecing the puzzles together, finding
Yeah,
the right slots for everybody.
exactly.
Let's see. Let's go to looking at the reflection and future of work. What has become something non-negotiable these days about how you work and do your work days?
Yeah, I think really for me, just realizing that I have to be interested. And maybe it's years in my sort of early career of being very disinterested or really struggling with focus. I just can't do something that I'm not interested in. And obviously, if I needed to, I would do any job that I had to do in order to earn money. So it's not about, I'm not saying kind of, it's not about privilege or being like, oh, just refuse to do anything that doesn't interest you. It's more about, in my practice, I'm constantly thinking, okay, so where do I want to devote my time and energy, and does that feel like it's going to be something I can genuinely show up in a really good way for, rather than seeing how other people might be doing things and thinking that that's how I should do it, but actually it's going to be really hard for me to sustain focus or to do, a really good job. So I think, yeah, making sure I'm interested in what I'm doing. And for me also, I think my politics are a really big part of the work that I do. And for me, coaching and supporting neurodivergent and queer people is not apolitical. So I'm really conscious of not pretending like we all exist in a vacuum and that we're just having work conversations, or, it's not to say that there are things that you would necessarily always want to get into in a great depth if you're having a particular conversation, but not ignoring the elephant in the room, that things are incredibly difficult right now for various reasons. So I think making sure that there is a political lens to what I'm doing as well, that it's not just in an apolitical vacuum.
Right. I mean, I think work is extremely political and all of its different facets, from corporate culture to just the idea of making people work to survive, and specifically in systems that are designed to set them up for failure.
Totally.
So being aware of that and working through that lens is really important, as even if we're trying to change the systems that be.
Yeah, definitely.
Okay, so what advice would you give someone who's really early in their neurodivergent self-discovery? Maybe they were recently diagnosed or recently started looking into how they can accommodate themselves instead of just trying to force themselves to be someone else.
Yeah, I would say for me, I think what I've noticed, and I've done a lot of post-assessment support for organisations that assess autistic and ADHD folk who are later identified. I think for me, there's definitely something about this classic pattern of people get an idea, or there's some kind of inspiration to research neurodiversity or autism, whatever it might be, and people go down a rabbit hole and they're learning everything, being like, oh, that feels like me, and maybe or maybe not they get an assessment. That is totally up to them. But there's definitely these phases that I think happen that people don't necessarily anticipate. And I think, first of all, there's this information gathering, which is very intense. It almost, for many people, becomes a special interest. It's, they're reframing all of their past experiences. And I think at that point, people can feel like, okay, I know how this works. I understand theoretically about autism or ADHD or anything else. But actually, I think there's another phase that people often forget, which is, once you've gathered all the information, there's this work which is actually understanding how it shows up for you, because the experience is so diverse and varied that you can watch a million YouTube videos from different people's experiences, but they won't necessarily represent yours. So it's really about then having that kind of observational lens of, okay, so how am I struggling with sensory experiences or anything else? And there's also this kind of wave for many people where everything becomes a lot more heightened, and that can feel terrifying. It's almost like you've taken the lid off of a box and then you're like, whoa, I'm a bit like being an oyster without a shell. Like everything is so intense and amplified. And that can feel really scary. But I would always encourage people to remember that that is temporary. Usually it's more a case of you've had your whole life without knowing this stuff, realize everything feels very fragile and difficult, and over time again it's just adapting to how we understand ourselves differently, and what we might need. And then I guess finally, I could talk about this for a long time because it's, if you can tell, a special interest. But I think one other thing to say is I would really encourage people to access some kind of support to help them with self-advocacy, whether that's meeting other neurodivergent folk who are a little bit further along in their figuring out of this stuff, working with some kind of a practitioner, obviously a qualified one, and yeah, just kind of practicing advocating for ourselves and really just having people to walk through this with, because it can feel very, very isolating, especially when many of us are surrounded by unidentified neurodivergent people because we are sort of drawn together, but other people haven't caught up yet. And so maybe you're experiencing that on your own and you're a bit like, where do you take this? Or like, who do you talk to about it? Yeah, so I think seeking some kind of support or community is so helpful and validating.
So I heard three things. It's, leaning into community support and learning self-advocacy. There was, when you're looking at other neurodivergent people and trying to learn about it, not focusing on finding someone who's just like you, but looking at the specific pieces of different people's experience that you relate to, because everybody with neurodivergent has a different experience. And so you're not going to find an exact match, but you can find pieces of yourself and other people. And then, the third one just completely lost my mind. Oh my God.
That's okay. It's all right if I say what I think it is.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I think it's there's the initial information gathering stage, and that's where people think they can kind of stop because they've just learned lots about it. But there's that whole other piece that you just mentioned there around like, no, actually, how does it look for you? And I think that's something that we can spend the rest of our lives figuring out. Even the questions that you sent me this for our conversation today, reading through them and thinking about my answers, I was like, wow, I really struggled with focus in my jobs, and I didn't realize the extent to which the narrative was you're lazy, you're unproductive. So that there's always stuff to uncover and more to figure out, isn't there? So I think expecting that will be an ongoing process and that is okay.
Lifelong learning,
Exactly.
So one last question before we close up for the day. What kind of future of work, really fills you with hope and a brighter future?
I think for me, so a lot of my work, without going into like a whole big long thing, my work was catalyzed by having two young children who were neurodivergent and worrying about how they would survive in school, and that kind of led us down understanding more about consent and self-directed education. And I have been really lucky to have facilitated for about 4.5 years in a setting for young neurodivergent. Well, there's a very high level of neurodivergence. It's not explicitly for neurodivergent people, but it's for young home educated people. And I think for me, seeing young people growing up with a sense of agency, understanding their neurodivergence from maybe not immediately, but like over time, whether it's that, they learn at some point in their childhood and are supported to figure that out for themselves and what they might need, seeing the level to which my children and their friends are able to advocate for their needs and really kind of think about where they want to put themselves fills me with a lot of hope, because I think that the more people who are able to do that, the more they can model to other people that it's okay to understand your needs and to ask for what you need. You might not always get it, but it's about negotiating the world with an understanding of how we best function. And I think the world feels like such a terrible place at the moment that having just any kind of sparks of hope to see those kinds of things, and to see how amazing it is that people later in life who felt like there was always something wrong with them, they never fit in, to see those people in, say, a group for late identified autistics all sharing experiences and being like, oh my gosh, I thought I was the only one. Again, like, gives me so much hope that more and more people are going to be able to access this information, either hopefully from a young age, if not at some point in their lives, and and really feel like they can, like, there's nothing wrong with them, they're just different, and that is okay, and actually really great for the world that we live in, because neurodivergent people, are often very good at thinking differently about things and seeing the world in different ways. Yeah, I think that.
Great. I love that. Really focusing on the future that we're building for the children and kind of hoping the children have the ability to learn who they are at a younger age and learn
Yeah.
who they are with the lens of acceptance of it's okay to be this way and you can support yourself and, advocate for yourself and you don't have to try to be different. You don't have to constantly think, I
Yeah.
just wish I wasn't like this. So,
Yeah.
thank you so much for coming on the show, How We Work
Thanks
Now,
for having me.
today. Was a pleasure speaking with you. Is there anything else you'd want to leave us with before we close off?
Um, I probably should, but I don't think so. Just thank you so much for having me. It's been a really interesting conversation. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you so much. I hope our viewers enjoyed this episode and gained a lot of insightful knowledge to help them. Thank you, everybody, and we'll see you next week.